As you can see, there's regional offices that there is somebody like me that you all may know between regions 1 through 10. So there's their point of contacts, and you can give them a call if you have some questions related to your specific area. What I'm going to try to do here is to address the responsibility areas, the grantee, as well as the contractor area. I may kind of gloss over some of the points, but it's not to slight you in any manner. It's just we have a short amount of time, and there's so much Davis-Bacon areas that we need to cover, or should be at least given to you. So with that, I'm just going to move on forward. Right now, we're in the midst of a what we call a semi-annual reporting period. It's on contracts that you all may award between October 1st, 2011 through March 31st, 2012. It's called the SAW reporting. Just by show of hands, how many folks are familiar with that reporting? Do you have any questions related to that reporting? It's a pretty routine type of reporting. It's only on contracts that you have awarded during that time frame. So if you haven't awarded anything, you can just simply put a negative reporting out, but it should be sent forward, because keep in mind, that report goes to the Department of Labor from HUD. And so our reporting to HUD is just as good as what we receive from you all. So if we don't get the contact information of the contracts that were awarded, then our reporting to Department of Labor is not as efficient and accurate as it should be, okay? Some of the objectives that I like to try and cover during this session here, and as I said before, I really like to zero in on your responsibilities as well as the contractor responsibilities, but some of those include just applying the basic prevailing wage requirements to a contract. What are the proper requirements that should be in place? Supporting the contractor's compliance. As administrators and enforcement officers, or I'm not sure what the various titles are, and the state agencies and local grantees that are here, but there should be a person designated as the key person for your agency that handles labor standards requirements. Monitor the contractor's performance. That's through the process of employee interviews and certified payroll reports and such. And when it comes to investigations, I often like to not go into a whole lot of detail on this, primarily because it's very involved. And what I would say is, if you receive a complaint from a worker, or anybody for that matter, on a project that you all are funding, that you give that previous person the list of regional labor relations officers, you give somebody a call and start with at least contacting them, and they should be able to provide you some assistance when it comes to a complaint or an investigation. I would highly recommend that. And with some of those investigations comes sanctions that can be applied. So those two last bullets kind of go hand in hand. So in general, community development. It applies to all contracts that are subject to Davis-Bacon, and those contracts being contracts, prime contracts over $2,000 that are for construction, alteration, repair, and that have the funding source under the Housing Community Development Act of '74 is the funding stream, that's where the application of Davis-Bacon is tied to in terms of statutory. It applies to all laborers and mechanics, and there's some specific definitions on laborers and mechanics, but in a nutshell, labor is somebody who does not have a skill, craft, or trade. They are basically picking up, hauling, sweeping, those kind of things. And then the mechanics is a general term used for electrician, plumber, roofer, those type of trades. Okay? Let me go back. There's a little caveat there that talks about in whole or in part. The contract, if you are awarding a contract, and it's subject to Davis-Bacon through the Housing Community Development Act funding, in whole or in part, meaning that CDBG funds may only be supplying a portion of that project. If there are other funding sources, Department of Energy or any other tax credit, things of that nature that may come together to make the project, then that project, while those other entities of funding sources may not be subject to Davis-Bacon, by virtue of community development funds going into that project, it transcends throughout the entire project, irregardless to the other funding sources. So it's important that you know that even a small portion will apply to the project and will trigger Davis-Bacon. Again, I said contracts over 2,000. The thresholds, I think I'm going to kind of skip through this if anybody has any specific questions, because this does not really address the responsibilities area. But in essence, force account workers are exempt, which are the local workers of the local entitlement agency. Volunteers are usually exempt. We have some guidance on that. Okay. Soft costs usually do not trigger. Soft costs of those costs are architectural fees, testing, things of that nature. All right, grantee responsibilities. It's important that from the very beginning that a grantee establish who the single point of contact will be in terms of the enforcement staff. Sometimes we call them LSO, Labor Standards Officer, but it may be a different terminology depending on the state or the agency. But number one, you need to start off with who is the point of contact and designating that person SO. Manage the effective construction contract and establishing a system. And as I spoke earlier, that system, especially in the larger community development offices, there's usually some coordination, communication that takes place between various departments that have the administration function of Davis-Bacon. For example, in a construction, the employee interview may be somebody who is in a different department than who has the administrative function on this side, or who may have any other parts of it, the monitoring side of it. And so it's very important, as that bullet is trying to indicate, is that there would be good coordination and communication between all the various departments that have the administration and enforcement action. Ensure that the bid document, contracts, and subcontracts contain the Federal Labor Standard clauses and applicable wage decision. With these two items, I would have to say that this is probably the most critical aspect of starting the project off on the right foot, right path, with regards to applicability of Davis-Bacon. Because if either one of these items are not incorporated, either directly incorporated or by reference into the contract, then the contract is already starting off in a non-compliant manner. And then also verifying the contractor's eligibility. That's referring to the prime contract, that there be some sort of verification through the EPLS listing that you all or whoever the grantee is has checked on that contractor to ensure that they're not debarred from participating. Are there any questions so far as I've covered some of these responsibilities? Great. All right. Another part of the aspect of administration enforcement is the conducting on-site employee interviews. And that's literally going out on site and randomly checking various subcontractors or contractors' employees and talking with them. Just randomly selecting, or there may be some systems that people have in place to check a certain electrical trades 1 week and plumbing trades 2 weeks from there. However it's done, it's one of those aspects of the administration and enforcement that must be done. There is no magical number of how many need to be done. It's an assurance that you have basically knowing that you have a good representative sampling of the contractors on site. So there used to be kind of a rule of thumb of 10%, but it's all relative to the project. Some projects are very lengthy, some are very short, and demand more attention up front. Review the certified payroll reports. Now, bullet number 1 and bullet number 2 basically go together. For example, you may receive certified payroll reports, and the bullet related to the employee interviews, that's a reconciliation point. So you receive certified payroll reports and somebody conducted employee interviews. Theoretically, the information conducted in the field should reconcile with what the contractor is reporting. And I didn't use this as an example in the other class session, but I think it's important that I bring this up. Right now, the Department of Labor, over the last couple of years, has really started to emphasize the area of misclassification. And misclassification comes in a number of different forms, but let me just say it in one snapshot, if I can, and this is a true live example found in HUD, where an employer submitted the certified payroll reports. Everything looked good on the face. Anthony can echo this because he was involved with this as well. So it looked good on the face of the record. And then we got an employee that worked on that project, that appeared on the certified payroll, that he was complaining about the project and not being afforded contracts. Initially, that's not an area we get into because our focus is on ensuring prevailing wages are in place. But we entertained it and met with the gentleman and brought the payrolls out to show him what we had received from the contractor. Well, lo and behold, as he looked down him, he was misclassified in some areas, and then the biggest issue, and I'm surprised it wasn't asked in the other session, was taxes were being taken out for him. But he did not know that taxes were being taken out for him, but yet on the other side, he was facing a tax liability to the IRS. So theoretically, that contractor misreported his information to show us, to give us an idea that, oh, everything's okay, you can pretty much, push something in front of somebody and make it look good, but it's going behind the layers to find out. Now, had he not come to us, it might have been something that got missed. But he did come forward, and once we reconciled it all, and we eventually had to turn it over to the Department of Labor for investigation. But those are the kind of things that could have been found out early if we had an employee interview on this gentleman. Now, theoretically, you cannot interview every employee. It's probably impossible to do that on very large projects, but had he been one of the randomly selected person, and you come back and you match it up to what was reporting, then it would have been a sign, a red flag that would have alerted us to say, something's not right, let's dig deeper, or let's package this and send it to the Department of Labor for review. So those kind of things do marry up, the employee interviews and certified payroll reporting. Maintain full documentation of actions, anything that, any of your the deficiencies, you might call them, or findings, whatever you find against that contractor, you should have a full record of the discussion, the deficiencies that need to be corrected, because those are some of the things that we would look for as we come out and review you as an agency. So having that kind of documentation of whatever actions have taken place is good. As I said before, referring investigations to the state agency in some cases, that the grantee might do that. They might bring it up from the local level all the way up to the state level, and at times the state level may come to either Department of Labor or us, asking for some help in that investigation. And then again, submit the required reports. That's basically the SAW report that I mentioned earlier. So the labor standards are the labor relations officer, it takes on many functions, and depending on the size of your agency and the way you're organized, some of the functions may reside in other departments, as I said before. But initially, at the beginning, planning stages of a project, that person, whoever's been designated as the labor relations officer, should be brought in through the planning stages, because oftentimes they're the ones who will be providing the applicable waste decision, and that is based on the scope of the work. So if scope of work changes throughout, then you may be dealing with some old information. As well as the Department of Labor's website for the waste decision is updated very periodically. So it's important that as that planning process is occurring, that you brought that person in, and that they're giving you, the updated information as you proceed forward to bid and award. Coincidentally, between bidding, competitive bidding, and to award, and I don't think it's in the slide, but there's a 90-day window. And you must award the contract or seek an extension between 90 days from bid opening to award. Okay, that's what we call lock in the waste decision. Okay? And lastly down there, I mentioned this in the other session about withholding funds on a contract. Within your ability as the labor relations officer or designee, you have the ability to withhold, you can cross-withhold funds, which is a manner of withholding funds on another project that contractor may be on. And let's say the current project is closed. It's, all funds have been dispersed. And then there's another activity with the same contractor, and you found an issue over here, but closed the project, and now the contractor is on another project. Same contractor, prime we're talking. You can cross-withhold, even though there was an event, an activity, an investigation of sort on this closed one, you can cross-withhold on this new project that's active and has funds to be able to possibly withhold. This was a little difficult to read up there as well as in the slides, so what we're going to do is make this available. But one of the questions that a lady in the other session asked is just to kind of go through this checklist. This is a sample checklist. If you may already have a checklist that you're using, and that's good, and this can perhaps enhance it. If it doesn't, that's fine. But this is intended to give you some of the key elements that you should have in your management system of control for the projects. And so the very first item, Holly or somebody over there, if you can help me read this, item number 1, can you read that?
The appointment of the labor relations officer.
Yes, okay, we talked about that. Then the waste decision, number 2, where you would just simply put the waste decision number, applicable waste decision number, mod, and contract date, and the value, and the project number, and so forth. And then item number 3, I had the computer up here, so I can't. Thank you. I think I need some new glasses, because you're further away than I am. Contractor eligibility, that's the EPLS listing. You would go through and you would go into the EPLS listing and put the prime's name in and find out whether or not they are eligible to do business using HUD funds. And you should print that page out that you get saying no activity. When it says no activity, that says that basically says that they're eligible. It's kind of a misnomer. But basically, and I would suggest printing that and perhaps stapling it to a checklist, or certainly at a minimum putting it into your contract file. And then as we jump down to number 5, that's just, at this stage, we're really looking at the activity has gone into construction now. And so on the far right where you have dates, those are dates of when deficiencies may be noted, you would note that. When there might be employee interviews taking place, you might note that. So as you can see, it can be expanded by a number of different directions to include more activities of, for example, payroll reviews and employee interviews. We'll go on. Now, as I just kind of did a snapshot of grantee responsibilities, is there any one specific area? Now, I know you all have come from all over, and so what I like to do is just take any questions that may be very generic, basic Davis-Bacon type of questions related to responsibilities. Yes, sir. Oh, there's a mic coming towards you.
For the 90-day term,
yes,
you had indicated 90 days from bid opening to award.
Yes.
We've always gone by 90 days to contract execution.
Same thing.
Okay.
Are you talking? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, we look at it as two different things. New York also has the Wicks law in their own prevailing wages, and by that they go by contract award is when the municipality makes the award of the bid to the contractor.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also look at when is the pre-construction and when is the contract actually being signed.
Mm-hmm. And that would be fine.
All right.
Yeah, that would be fine. What may have confused some of you, and let me try and clarify it. This is assuming, and I don't know how many of you all are local grantees or state grantees, because I realize that there's a level between the state and the local grantee. This is assuming the local grantee has control over that contract, and that they are. So you can see the difference there in levels of that trace down to the local entity. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Do you have a cross-cutting strategy on employee interviews? Because I think our procedure has always been we recommend a interview for at least one classification per project, somebody from each classification. But some of our administrators or even staff think that pertains to every contractor and subcontractor, that at least one person from each of the contracts has to be interviewed per classification. Is there any cross-cutting?
There's not a direct, I will repeat that. The question is there any sort of cross-cutting tool that we may have or guidance that we may offer relative to employee interviews and how many and what trades and things of that nature that should be conducted? Did I sufficiently cover your question? Okay. And basically no to your answer to your question. What we have found is that it could vary depending on the length of the contract and the number of contractors or subs. So you might want to do it in terms of phasing, where you do it at 20% or 25% of the project, whoever's on that project at that time, another 50%, 75% as the project moves along on the construction schedule. Or if it's, for example, a sub rehab, I don't know, let's just say it's a substantial rehabilitation where the focus, the primary focus of the laborers and mechanics on that sub rehab, you're not going to have a whole lot of trades. You're primarily going to have electricians, plumbers, maybe some roofers, versus a new construction from ground up where you're going to have clearing and grading, you're going to have equipment operators, you're going to have a lot extensive number of classifications that you have to look at and consider. So it just kind of all depends on the length of the project. There's no hard fast. There used to be like a 10% rule. 10% of all the trades, all the different subs. But that's a guiding post. It's not hard fast. I would say if you can cover a good majority of the various classes throughout the project, and you might start with one sub that's, I'm just going to use electrical at the beginning, and you find that his or her information reconciles with your certified payroll report. There's really no sense in going back to that sub 6 months down the road where you've already kind of found a good match and it seems as though you have a good level of insurance that, this information coming from both ends is reconcilable. Did I answer your question? I hope so. Okay. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I have a quick question about in terms of the units that you described. You have there that the units are 8 units, but if you can just kind of go in, sometimes we get a little gray area of what constitutes the 8 units under certain contract terms, or if it's scattered in a contract specific per house, or it has to be all, those units has to be all under one contract. I mean, I've heard it a lot of different ways of when it kicks in and when it doesn't.
She's referring to slide way back before we start, right here, right, the thresholds. We have, has everybody seen this guidebook that we have called Making Davis-Bacon Work? The LCA guide. There's a purple guidebook for you all, and then there's a blue complementary guidebook for contractors. And they're meant to go kind of hand in hand. In there, we have applicability factors. And with those applicability factors, it kind of depends on, excuse me, it kind of depends on the type of endeavor that's being undertaken. So, for example, if you have scattered sites and it's all under one contract, and they're all over the place, but it's one contract, and I just want to make sure that if we're talking the same thing, are you referring to one contract, scattered sites? Is that what you're...
It may be in terms of their contract may be to carry out rehab activities or construction activities, and they may have contract specific per homeowner. And then you may have some contracts where they may identify the sites in the terms of the contracts. So you may know that in this contract they may do reconstruction or rehab of 10 to 15 homes under their contract, or you may hire them to do rehab activities, and then they have their contracts with the property owner specifically. Okay. And it may be the same contractor, but he has contracts per house.
Okay, and I understand your question because we get that question quite a bit. And what happens is you have to look at the contract, the construction contract that we're speaking of. And that's what this is referring to as well. So keep in mind that if a contractor has multiple contracts with various homeowners, then that's one application that if there's only, less than that, less than 8, then there wouldn't be the application. Versus the other scenario that you mentioned where scatter sites, and there's multiple, and they're all over the place, but there's one contract then, and it's over 8, then that's a different application. So you have to kind of look at where the construction contract is. Always keep that in mind, is where is the construction contract and who it's with. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna, unless there's any other additional questions related to grantee responsibilities, I'm gonna move forward to contractor responsibilities. And in a nutshell, the contractor is responsible for all of his or her subs and the sub-tiers and any sub-tiers under that. So the whole breadth and depth of contractors on the project ultimately resides with the prime, and he or she has responsibility for any of the activity that occurs with those primes. The subs. We conduct pre-construction conferences we may participate in the multifamily project. So just so that you all know, we kind of do the same thing that you all do on the HUD side of multifamily. And so we have an understanding of all of what you all deal with. And so basically, on a pre-construction conference, this is where we communicate the requirement for the prime. He or she has the ultimate responsibility to ensure compliance for his subs, including the labor provision and the applicable wage decision in all subcontract. That is his or her responsibility as well. So it may get into the prime contract, but that prime has got to make sure that it flows all the way down to all the subs and sub-tiers. And as I mentioned earlier, those are the two main things that can make a project go off the track if either one of those, they go together, are not included in the contract. And for CDBG projects, that labor standard provision is the HUD 4010. I think you probably all are aware of that. And then, of course, the applicable wage decision, as it depends on the character of work, a construction contract that is being undertaken. Review the wage decision for needed classifications. We try to encourage the prime to provide us with a list up front. That prime can look at, get a general idea of what wage classifications may be missing, and can give you a comprehensive list that can be, first of all, it has to be submitted to the Department of Labor for their approval, because what is happening is, it's called a conformance. Department of Labor calls it a conformance. But essentially, that classification that sub may need or that prime may need is not on there. And so we're basically amending the wage decision and incorporating a new request to add classifications. So we usually will ask them, provide us with your list early on, and so we can submit them all together to the Department of Labor. Provide the contractor with forms and guidance up front. That blue book, as I called it, the Making Davis Bacon Work Contractor Guide, multiple copies. I mean, we just provide it. In fact, you might want to link it somewhere on your web page, but it transcends all the way down to all subs. And, basically it's the Bible for them. It gives them A through Z. Obviously, everything can't be covered in a guidebook, but a lot of their questions can be answered out of that guidebook. Ensure the agency's access to employees on site. We kind of touched upon this in the other session, whereby the contractor, prime, should be informing his or her subs that somebody from the Department of Labor may come by. Somebody from your agency may come by. Somebody from HUD may come out and to conduct an employee interview, and that you should allow the employee to have access to that person, whoever it might be, to come out. It's totally voluntary, but they should have the choice to participate or not. It shouldn't be a decision made by the contractor saying, no, don't talk to those folks, because now you're getting into another issue that's a violation of an act that, we don't want to start into having an issue where the act could be violated along with some regulations. So they have to allow the employee to participate. It's their choosing if they choose not to, but they must allow them to that choice. Submit the certified payroll reports for their own employees. So basically, everybody that's on the project needs to be covered on a payroll report. We have gotten the question before, what if it's a one-person operation and he or she is just a one-person crew, like a dump truck driver or a backhoe operator or something like that, and they're self-employed and they own their own piece of equipment and they have no crew with them. What happens to that person? How do they get covered on the certified payroll? Well, we have a letter in on our website. If you go to our website, we have a letter. What's that letter number? 9601 that speaks to that kind of condition. But basically, if you find or if somebody is in that kind of condition, they have to be covered on whoever contracted their services. So basically, sub A, you have sub-tier 1, or A, is the backhoe operator, self-employed single operator. He or she would need to be covered on subcontractor A. who employed them to do the backhoe operations for the project. So everybody who works on the project that is a laborer or mechanic on the project must be covered on a certified payroll report. Subcontractor responsibilities. They need to prepare their weekly reports and submit them to the prime in a timely manner. That's not bundling them up towards the end of the project, because that doesn't do you any good in terms of administration and enforcement throughout the project. So if you find that you're not getting weekly reports in a timely manner, it's red flags should go up, and it might be cause for, at least in multifamily, what we have done, we try to avoid it, is to withhold future disbursements until they can get caught up. Because we just do not want to wait until the end, find that there's violations, and they're ready to close on the project at the end. And that's not good for relations between companies and between the different contractors that you all may be doing business with. So it's best that they understand their responsibility and communicate it down to their sub as well. Review the wage decision, request additional classification, same kind of thing. One of the things I don't know if I pointed out is at the job site, 2 items must be posted at the job site. The wage decision, contract wage decision, as well as the poster. It's a poster, making Davis Bacon work, make a Davis Bacon poster, that basically informs the general public as well as the workers that this is a project subject to Davis Bacon, and on that poster it should have a block, who the point of contact, the LSO, or whoever that designated person is, that if a worker had an issue or concern outside of his employer, that he or she could go to somebody and feel as though there won't be any reprisal against them for raising a concern about perhaps maybe their wages or something. I mentioned some of the contract provisions, what's incorporated in 2006-03. That is another letter that you might find helpful in terms of the application of multiple ways. Is that 90? I think that might be an error. I got to check that. But incorporated in every contract is the contract provision that must be included. Identify the contractor's responsibility, letting them know what their responsibilities are. I mentioned the HUD 4010. That is the labor standard provision that must be included along with the wage decision. And it's good to really remedy any non-compliances as you go through the project. You know, there should be some responsiveness from the contractor as they go along to responding to any of the inquiries that may come up, and again, not waiting until the end of the project to try to respond and reconcile. This question came up. I kind of went through it a little quickly, and I think we're running short on time, but I just want to briefly touch upon, there are 4 basic classifications for construction, character of construction. There's the building, highway, heavy, and residential. And depending on the type of work, the scope of work will depend on the type of wage decision that should be applicable to the contract. So this information is in your handout. And what complements this, or really what this information comes from is the A130 and A131. Those are both DOL memorandums that gives more specific guidance on the types of projects that may fall under a certain character of work, construction. As you see here, I've kind of put a notation, because we've had some issues that have come up where mixed contract or mixed use of projects, where 2 wage decisions may be warranted. And we have a letter that speaks to that, 9603, that speaks to if you have that kind of situation going on where you may have to incorporate 2 wage decisions. I would highly advise that if you find this situation, you may be getting to that point of a mixed race decision, that you give your local labor relations office a call and go through the scope of work with them. Because it can get a little difficult, and at times they may have to consult with the Department of Labor. I talked about lock-in, and I won't go through that unless there's any specific questions related to that. Okay, I think that's about it. Again, the semi-annual labor standards enforcement report, you should, if you haven't received a notice already, you probably will be getting something from the local office letting you know that we need your information, and we certainly appreciate you sending that in. This is what it kind of looks like. And then our resources page. You'll find a lot of labor relation letters on the MARC series. Kind of tidbits of information. The on the MARC is more tidbits of information, and the labor relation letters are more detailed policy type of letters that have been issued. Are there any other questions that I may? Yes, sir. I'll repeat the question for you. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
We're going to touch on MBE, WBE. Is that the same requirement as CDBG?
That's not an area that we have oversight and responsibility for. I don't know where that requirement. I'm sorry, I did say I was going to repeat it. Related to MBE, WE reporting and so forth. That's not an area that we cover in our jurisdiction of responsibility on the contract. I think there might be somebody we can get an answer to you on where that reporting would go. Tennille?
We aren't covering it in this section, but most of that falls under, in most contexts, under our Section 3 requirements. And so we will provide that resource to you. There are a couple of things that you're hearing folks say we provide it. We're just going to have to shoot out an email with those attachments and links to the participants so that you'll have those requirements there. It is a great guide that walks you through those requirements too. From HUD's perspective, your state may put on something on top of that to be mindful.
And the second question was, what happens if you have a prime contractor working on a project and they go out of business or go bankrupt, and then you have all the subs underneath that are still operational? Do they finish out their work under the existing contract, or do you have to rebid the entire contract? Let's say you're 70% done. Do you have to rebid the 30% out, or do you just let them finish out under the existing prime contract, even though they're not in business?
We've had that situation actually happen at a couple of HUD projects. And I can't really tell you exactly what to do, but I can tell you what we had to do, which is the multifamily office had to rebid that balance of that work, and they had to work with the bonding company to finish out that portion of the work. So that's what, in the multifamily world, what they had to do. We were in support of, as they restarted that project, new payroll started coming in. I don't recall, I believe they kept some of the same subs. I can't recall. It's been a number of years back. It's only happened like once or twice. So I don't know if that's a question. That's more of a contracting type of question that may reside with maybe your legal office or somebody in the contract administration area. I think the mic is coming towards you. This will be the last one.
I just want to clarify that subcontractors also need to be cleared from the EPLS, correct?
I'm sorry. You said
subcontractors also need to be cleared on the EPLS?
In terms of the responsibility for you all?
Right.
Documenting that?
Yes.
That same question was asked in the other area. And I believe that's an area that, from a programmatic standpoint, that it's best that you do that. But the regulation, Department of Labor, let me speak in the context of the Department of Labor's regulation, DOL 29, Title 29, speaks to the prime. But I think what you're referring to is something within the HUD regulation. keep in mind, and I don't want to confuse anybody, by no means, but most of what we do in terms of federal labor standard reside in the 29 CFR. Most of what we do. There's the 24 CFR, obviously that's the HUD regulation that has other elements of information that cross-cut.
So it's basically up to us, is what you're saying?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that, but I believe that that's something within the CP. Shirley, do you? 24 CFR Part 85.
Okay. So it's a yes, you have to.
Yes.
Okay.
If it's under the CFR 24 Part 85. Thank you all. I appreciate everything. By the way, we have a technical assistance guide. If anybody's interested, it's kind of a quick snapshot of some of the requirements that you may have to do or that should be done. And we kind of consolidated it into one guidebook.